Imagine stepping into a space where titles matter more than reputation, where uniforms carry weight, where hierarchy is understood without being spoken, where a single sentence can redraw the energy of the entire room. Now imagine someone looking at you, not impressed, not curious, just assessing, and then saying calmly, "Get off my sub." Not shouted, not emotional, just firm. In environments built on order, tone says everything. Across the room stands a man most people recognize instantly, not because of authority but because of presence. A face known worldwide. A career shaped by discipline. A public image built on humility. But in this moment, none of that matters. There's no red carpet. No cameras. No applause. Just silence. And the subtle tension that forms when one person believes control is being challenged. Now here's the real question. When someone tests your position, do you react? Or do you regulate? The air feels different. Not hostile, but charged. A few people glance sideways, pretending not to notice. Others freeze slightly, sensing something unfolding beneath the surface. In high-pressure environments, challenges aren't always loud. Sometimes they're measured, intentional, observational. The man who spoke stands tall, grounded in authority. He expects compliance. Immediate, clean, professional. The other man doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't explain who he is. Instead, he pauses. And that pause becomes the most powerful thing in the room. Because calm, when it's real, is unsettling. You see, most people misunderstand composure. They think it's hesitation or uncertainty. But sometimes, composure is control in its purest form. What happens next isn't explosive. It's subtle. A shift in posture. A steady breath. Eye contact that doesn't challenge, but doesn't retreat either. And in that quiet exchange, something begins to change. Not the rules, not the hierarchy, but perception. And that's where this story truly begins. Before anything escalates, it's important to understand something. This isn't about aggression. It's about psychological pressure. High-performance environments, especially those built on structure and discipline, operate on unspoken codes. Status is defined by role. Authority is defined by position. Respect is often immediate, but it's also constantly evaluated. When someone unfamiliar enters that space, even briefly, they're assessed. Not emotionally, professionally. And that assessment can feel like a test. Now imagine being someone the world instantly recognizes. Fame usually shifts rooms in your favor. People soften. They smile differently. They adjust their tone. But remove the spotlight, and something interesting happens. Recognition fades. Expectation resets. In this fictional scenario, the tension wasn't personal. It wasn't hostile. It was procedural. A firm voice reinforcing boundaries. A reminder of hierarchy. Get off my sub. Short, direct, controlled. The statement wasn't about disrespect. It was about order. And that's what makes moments like this powerful. Because when structure meets identity, ego often tries to step in. But here's where the story takes its shape. The man being addressed is inspired by someone known publicly for discipline and preparation, Keanu Reeves. Reeves has often spoken about humility, respect, and training. For films like John Wick, he trained extensively, learning choreography, weapon handling, and physical control strictly for performance purposes. Not as a military authority. Not as a real-world combat leader. But as an actor committed to authenticity in storytelling. That distinction matters. Because what people sometimes confuse with intimidation is often just presence developed through discipline. Training, even for film, builds habits. Controlled breathing. Measured movement. Situational awareness. And in high-pressure environments, those habits show. Back in the room, no one raises their voice. No dramatic confrontation unfolds. Instead, something more subtle occurs. The officer expects immediate compliance. The response? Pause. Not defiance. Not submission. Just awareness. That pause signals something unexpected. Emotional regulation. Most people, when corrected publicly, instinctively react. They defend. They explain. They assert identity. But composure interrupts escalation. And here's what's interesting about psychological dynamics. When one person doesn't escalate, the other must recalibrate. Authority often anticipates friction, resistance, pushback. But calm neutrality creates uncertainty. Not threatening uncertainty. Reflective uncertainty. The room senses it. No one moves closer. No one intervenes. There's simply a shift in attention. Because tension without aggression is compelling. And that's what this moment becomes. Not a showdown. A study. How does someone maintain dignity without asserting dominance? How do you respect hierarchy without shrinking your presence? The answer isn't loud. It's posture. It's breath. It's eye contact held just long enough to signal understanding, but not intimidation. In many ways, this is less about two individuals and more about human behavior under pressure. When ego is invited into the room, who allows it to sit down? That's the deeper layer of this story. Because strength, real strength, doesn't rush to prove itself. It observes first. And in environments built on discipline, that observation can quietly reshape the atmosphere. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. But something important has already begun. Perception is shifting. And once perception shifts, everything else follows. The room doesn't explode. It tightens. There's a difference. Explosions are loud. Tightening is silent. After the instruction, calm, firm, professional, the air seems to compress slightly. Not with danger. With awareness. People nearby continue what they're doing, but slower now. Peripheral vision sharpens. Conversations soften. Moments like this are rarely about what's said. They're about how it's received. The officer stands steady. His posture communicates structure. Expectation. A chain of command that doesn't bend for celebrity or familiarity. In environments like this, clarity isn't optional. It's required. Across from him, the man inspired by Keanu Reeves doesn't argue the instruction. He processes it. And that processing, that deliberate pause, becomes noticeable. Because most people fill silence quickly. They justify. They explain. They smile nervously. They rush to smooth tension before it grows. But here, silence is allowed to breathe. A slow inhale. Barely visible, but present. Shoulders relax, not drop. Chin remains level, not raised. Eye contact is steady, but not sharp. It's the kind of eye contact that signals attention, not opposition. And that's where the subtle tension begins to shift. You see, confrontation often requires two participants. But psychological pressure is different. It tests boundaries quietly. Will this person challenge authority? Will he assert identity? Will he lean on recognition? Nothing in the response suggests any of that. Instead, there's alignment. A slight nod. Not exaggerated. Just acknowledgement. But the body language says something more refined. I understand the structure. I'm not here to disrupt it. That composure creates a small ripple. Because when someone expects resistance and doesn't receive it, their internal script has to adjust. The officer's stance remains firm. Yet the dynamic has already evolved. The instruction was delivered. It was heard. It was respected. So why does the moment still feel significant? Because tension doesn't always come from aggression. Sometimes it comes from expectation. People expect drama when strong personalities cross paths. They anticipate dominance displays. Posturing. Ego. But discipline interrupts that narrative. The man inspired by Reeves has spent years training for demanding roles, including projects like John Wick, where precision and control define every movement. While that training serves performance, the habits it builds, breath control, spatial awareness, measured pacing, often extend beyond the set. And in this fictional moment, those habits quietly show. He steps back, not abruptly. Just enough. Distance resets. The energy diffuses slightly. There's no visible surrender. No dramatic compliance. Just professional adjustment. The kind that says, the environment matters more than my ego. And that's when the room truly shifts. Because observers sense maturity instinctively. No one whispers. No one reacts outwardly. But there's a collective recalibration. The anticipated clash dissolves before it begins. And here's the psychological twist. When escalation is denied oxygen, it fades. Not defeated. Not suppressed. Just neutralized. The officer gives a brief, almost imperceptible nod. The interaction is complete. Structure remains intact. Respect remains mutual. What could have become a spectacle instead becomes a study in restraint. And restraint, when intentional, carries its own quiet authority. No one won. No one lost. But something powerful was demonstrated. Control isn't proven in confrontation. It's proven in regulation. And that realization lingers in the room long after the words themselves have settled. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. And subtle moments are often the most revealing. The initial instruction had been delivered. The response had been measured. Distance had been adjusted. On the surface, the exchange was complete. But beneath the surface, something else was unfolding. Perception was recalibrating. In structured environments, authority is clear. Roles are defined. Lines are respected. Yet human interaction always contains an invisible layer: tone, posture, awareness. And that layer can quietly reshape a moment without anyone raising their voice. The officer's stance remained steady, professional, grounded in responsibility. His words were never personal. They were procedural, a reinforcement of order. And that's precisely why the response matters. Because when order is respected without resistance, tension has nowhere to expand. The man inspired by Keanu Reeves doesn't attempt to explain himself. He doesn't lean on recognition. He doesn't signal status. Instead, he observes. Observation is a skill rarely discussed in conversations about strength. Yet it's foundational. He notices the details, the insignia, the precision in uniform, the tone that reflects responsibility rather than ego. These are cues. And cues matter. There's a small shift in his posture again. Not retreat. Alignment. Feet repositioned slightly. Shoulders angled just enough to signal cooperation. The movement is almost invisible, but intentional. This is where many misunderstand composure. They think composure is passive. But real composure is active regulation. It's choosing the response that preserves dignity on both sides. The officer registers the adjustment. There's no outward reaction, no visible softening. But the atmosphere lightens by a fraction. The kind of fractional shift that only people in the room would feel. It's not about dominance. It's about clarity. The boundary was communicated. The boundary was respected. And because of that, escalation dissolves before it ever forms. This is the quiet power of de-escalation. There's a brief pause, not awkward, not heavy, just transitional. In that pause, something changes internally for everyone observing. The narrative they expected doesn't arrive. No clash. No raised voices. No dramatic standoff. Instead, they witness something rarer. Mutual professionalism. The officer slightly adjusts his stance. A micro shift. Less rigid. Still authoritative, but no longer braced for resistance. It's subtle. But subtlety carries weight. The man inspired by Reeves gives a small nod, not submissive, not exaggerated. Just acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement lies the real shift. Respect doesn't always require agreement. It requires awareness. For a brief second, eye contact is held again. Not challenging. Not probing. Simply steady. It says, I see your role. I respect the structure. There is no need for conflict. That message travels without words. And that's when the environment resets. Conversations resume at normal speed. Movements return to rhythm. The compressed energy disperses. Nothing outwardly extraordinary has happened. Yet internally, a lesson has just been demonstrated. Because most people assume strength must announce itself. But here, strength chose restraint. And restraint influenced the entire atmosphere. Think about that. No raised voice changed the room. No physical assertion altered the dynamic. It was a shift in balance, psychological, not physical. The officer maintains command of his space. The visitor maintains command of himself. Both forms of control coexist. That coexistence is the real transformation. In a world that constantly frames interactions as competitions, this moment refuses that framing. There's no winner to declare. No pride to protect. Just a professional boundary met with mature awareness. And that's where the deeper shift occurs. Because observers don't just remember confrontation. They remember composure under scrutiny. The moment lingers not because of conflict, but because of what didn't happen. No escalation. No ego display. No spectacle. Just two individuals navigating structure with discipline. And sometimes, the strongest statement a person can make is choosing not to turn tension into a performance. Now imagine this moment leaves the room. Not physically, digitally. Someone describes it online. Not maliciously, just briefly. And within minutes, the narrative changes. Officer shuts down celebrity. Keanu stands his ground. Who won? That's how the internet works. It compresses nuance into headlines. It turns subtle exchanges into scoreboards. It searches for dominance where there was only discipline. But that question, who won, completely misses the point. Because nothing about this moment was a competition. And yet, culturally, we are trained to see it that way. Two men. A tense exchange. Pause. Surely someone must have asserted superiority. Surely someone must have backed down. But strength isn't always visible in forward motion. Sometimes it's visible in restraint. The man inspired by Keanu Reeves has built a public image around humility. In interviews, on sets, in public interactions, there's a consistency. calm tone, measured responses, an absence of spectacle. That consistency matters more than any fictional confrontation. Because what people often admire isn't dominance. It's stability. In online spaces, especially, drama travels faster than discipline. A raised voice gets clipped. A confrontation becomes a reel. A heated exchange becomes commentary fuel. But composure? Composure doesn't trend easily. It doesn't shout. It doesn't exaggerate. And that's why it's powerful. In this scenario, nothing explosive occurred. Yet the psychological impact was significant. The officer maintained structure. The visitor maintained self-control. That's not a clash. That's balance. But balance rarely satisfies an audience hungry for a winner. Online people would debate. Did he stand his ground? Was the officer too aggressive? Was it a power move? And in doing so, they would project their own beliefs about strength onto the situation. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people equate strength with visible dominance. They think confidence must be demonstrated outwardly, asserted loudly, proven publicly. But real confidence is often quiet. It doesn't need witnesses. And this is where the deeper layer of the story reveals itself. The officer didn't lose authority because he wasn't challenged. The visitor didn't lose dignity because he complied. Both remained intact. And that's rare. The internet would likely frame it as, he backed down, or he put him in his place. But neither is accurate. What actually happened was more mature, and therefore less sensational. One person enforced a boundary. The other respected it. No ego spiral. No escalation loop. No viral moment of outrage. And perhaps that's the real lesson hidden inside the scenario. Why are we so conditioned to seek conflict? Why do we feel unsatisfied when tension dissolves peacefully? There's something revealing about that impulse. We've grown accustomed to highlight reels of confrontation, especially in celebrity culture. We expect drama when fame intersects with authority. But maturity disrupts that expectation. Think about it. If the visitor had argued, even politely, the moment would have expanded. Voices might have tightened. Observers might have leaned in further. And suddenly what began as structure would morph into spectacle. But spectacle was denied oxygen. Because ego never entered the room. That's the part the internet would overlook. The strongest psychological move in the entire exchange wasn't a step forward. It was emotional regulation. And emotional regulation doesn't look cinematic. It looks boring. It looks uneventful. It looks like nothing happened. But internally everything happened. A potential clash was neutralized before it formed. Authority remained stable. Identity remained intact. And observers witnessed something they may not even consciously register: controlled presence. In a digital world obsessed with owning someone, perhaps the more impressive skill is not needing to own the moment at all. There's a quiet maturity in that. Because when someone doesn't feel the need to prove themselves, they remove the fuel from confrontation entirely. That doesn't make them weak. It makes them grounded. If this scenario had ended differently, louder, sharper, more dramatic, it would have traveled faster online. But it wouldn't have carried the same depth. Depth doesn't shout. It settles. And maybe that's why this moment matters. Not because of what was said. Not because of who had rank. But because, in a culture that rewards escalation, two individuals demonstrated something rarer. Control without performance. And that kind of strength doesn't trend. It endures. Now slow everything down. Because this is the part most people rush past. The exchange is over. The atmosphere has reset. Life continues. But the lesson lingers. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't rush to defend itself. It doesn't scramble to correct perception. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. Real strength regulates first. Think about that. When pressure rises, what's your instinct? To explain? To justify? To assert? Most of us feel the pull immediately. That internal surge. The need to respond before silence feels uncomfortable. But silence isn't weakness. Silence is space. And space creates control. In this fictional moment inspired by Keanu Reeves, nothing dramatic happened on the surface. No speech. No display. No visible dominance. And yet, something powerful was demonstrated. Emotional discipline. That kind of discipline isn't built in a single moment. It's practiced, repeated, reinforced over time. Actors who prepare intensely for roles, like in John Wick, often talk about the mental side of preparation. Precision, breath control, awareness of surroundings, timing. While that training serves performance, the internal habits can extend beyond it. Breathing before reacting. observing before speaking, centering before moving. Those are transferable skills. And in high-pressure moments they become visible. Here's the deeper truth. Most confrontations escalate not because of the initial comment, but because of the reaction to it. One sharp tone triggers another. One defensive remark invites a stronger response. It becomes a loop. But when one person chooses not to feed the loop, the cycle breaks. That's what happened here. No loop. No spiral. Just interruption. And interruption requires self-awareness. Ask yourself honestly. When someone corrects you publicly, when someone challenges your space, when someone speaks firmly, do you feel smaller? Or do you feel threatened? The answer often reveals where ego sits. Ego wants validation. Ego wants the last word. Ego wants the visible win. But maturity understands something else. Not every moment is a battlefield. Some moments are simply tests of regulation. And regulation is invisible strength. In the scenario, the officer fulfilled his responsibility. The visitor respected it. Neither identity was diminished. That outcome feels almost anticlimactic. But maybe that's because we've grown used to unnecessary intensity. Imagine if more interactions unfolded this way. Clear boundary. Calm response. Reset. No lingering hostility. No need to prove anything afterward. That kind of interaction doesn't just preserve order. It preserves dignity. And dignity matters more than dominance. There's something quietly powerful about a person who doesn't feel compelled to expand every tense moment. Who doesn't interpret firmness as disrespect. Who doesn't convert correction into conflict. That person moves differently in life. They waste less energy. They sleep lighter. They carry fewer grudges. Because they're not fighting invisible wars inside their own mind. Think about your last stressful interaction. Maybe it wasn't dramatic. Maybe it was small. A comment. A correction. A tone you didn't like. How did you respond? Did you protect your image? Or did you protect your peace? There's a difference. Protecting your image is external. Protecting your peace is internal. And the strongest people choose the second. Not because they're passive, but because they're secure. Security removes urgency. When you're secure in who you are, you don't need every room to confirm it. You don't need every interaction to elevate you. You don't need to win exchanges that don't matter long term. That's the hidden strength behind composure. It's not suppression. It's selection. Selecting which moments deserve energy. Selecting when to speak. Selecting when silence is enough. And perhaps that's the most important lesson in this entire story. Power isn't proven when things are easy. It's revealed when pressure appears. Anyone can be calm when respected. It takes discipline to remain calm when tested. So maybe the question isn't who had authority or who held their ground. Maybe the real question is who controlled themselves. Because self-control is the only control that truly lasts. And once you master that, no environment feels threatening. No tone feels destabilizing. No moment feels like something you must conquer. You simply respond. Measured, grounded, steady. And that steadiness speaks louder than any reaction ever could. By now the moment has passed. The room is normal again. Voices return to their natural rhythm. Footsteps resume their ordinary pace. If someone walked in 5 minutes later, they would never know anything meaningful had just occurred. And that's exactly the point. Because the strongest shifts in life rarely look dramatic from the outside. They look ordinary. But internally they redefine something. In this fictional scenario inspired by Keanu Reeves, there was no showdown. No cinematic confrontation like in John Wick. No dramatic reversal. Just a firm instruction. A calm response. And a reset. That's it. Yet hidden inside that simplicity is a lesson most people overlook. We've been conditioned to admire intensity. We celebrate comebacks. We replay confrontations. We analyze who owned the moment. But rarely do we pause to appreciate the person who didn't need to. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. Maybe it isn't the one with the highest rank, or the most recognition, or the sharpest response. Maybe it's the one who feels no urgency to prove anything. Think about how often we escalate small situations. A comment at work, a disagreement in public, a misunderstanding in a conversation. We feel our identity tighten. We feel the impulse to clarify, to defend, to assert. But what if strength sometimes looks like letting the moment breathe? In that brief exchange, there were two choices available. Turn tension into performance, or turn tension into composure. Performance is visible. Composure is internal. Performance seeks validation. Composure preserves alignment. and alignment lasts longer. Here's something powerful to consider. When you don't react impulsively, you gain something rare: perspective. You see the situation instead of being swallowed by it. You assess instead of assume. You respond instead of react. That distinction changes everything. Because reacting is automatic. Responding is intentional. And intention is where discipline lives. The internet would never celebrate this kind of ending. There's no viral clip of someone being put in their place. No dramatic stare-down replayed in slow motion. No triumphant music swelling at the end. Just maturity. And maturity doesn't trend. But it transforms. If more people chose regulation over reaction, how many conflicts would dissolve before forming? How many arguments would never escalate? How many relationships would remain intact? Calm doesn't mean passive. Calm means anchored. Anchored people don't drift with every wave of pressure. They stay steady. And steadiness influences rooms more than volume ever will. There's something deeply secure about a person who doesn't chase dominance. Who doesn't interpret firmness as disrespect. Who doesn't mistake authority for personal attack. That security changes how you move through the world. You stop seeing challenges everywhere. You stop interpreting correction as insult. You stop converting structure into confrontation. Instead, you conserve energy. And conserved energy becomes clarity. Clarity becomes confidence. And confidence, real confidence, doesn't demand attention. It simply exists. So perhaps the real power in this story wasn't in the words spoken. It wasn't in the uniform. It wasn't in reputation. It was in restraint. Restraint is misunderstood. People think it means holding back because you can't move forward. But sometimes restraint means you could escalate, and consciously choose not to. That's control. And control over self is the highest form of strength. Because external power can be taken. Status can shift. Recognition can fade. But self-regulation travels with you everywhere. In boardrooms. In relationships. In public spaces. In moments of correction. It becomes your quiet advantage. Now ask yourself something honestly. When the next tense moment arrives in your life, and it will you seek to win the exchange? Or will you seek to master yourself within it? Those are very different goals. Winning feeds ego temporarily. Mastery builds character permanently. And character compounds. Over time, people begin to notice something about you. Not because you dominate conversations. Not because you out-argue others. But because you don't rattle easily. You don't rush. You don't flare up. There's steadiness there. And steadiness builds trust. Trust builds influence. Influence builds quiet authority. The kind that doesn't need to say, "Do you know who I am?" Because it doesn't depend on who you are. It depends on how you carry yourself. Maybe the strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins. It's the one who doesn't need to. The one who understands that not every moment deserves a performance. The one who knows that calm under pressure is a choice, not a personality trait. And the one who leaves the room exactly as centered as they entered it. If this perspective shifted how you see strength even slightly, then the lesson has already done its work. Because real discipline isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. And once you master that, no room feels threatening. No tone feels destabilizing. No instruction feels personal. You simply adjust. You breathe. You align. And you move forward steady. Quietly strong. Without needing anyone to notice.